Love to see so many smiling faces so early in the morning. Thank you all very much for being here with us. My name is Jared Sloan. I'm the Senior Vice President of Member Engagement at NVC, and I want to welcome you to our inaugural NOVA Roadmap Innovators and Stakeholders Exchange, hence NOVA Rise. Before we get started, I want to take a few minutes here to offer some brief remarks to set the stage for this new dialogue in Northern Virginia. First, I want to thank the more than 50 investors who have stepped up to support the NOVA Roadmap. You've put resources behind a vision for our future, and events like this exist because of that commitment. We don't take that lightly, so thank you. I want to recognize the elected officials and their staff that are in attendance today. Thank you for your commitment to NOVA. If you just take a quick moment to rise and be recognized if you are an elected official in attendance today. And of course, I want to thank our esteemed panelists and moderators for taking valuable time from their busy schedules to share their deep knowledge of this region. These experts are building and deploying and innovating in their respective industries. To everyone who made the time to be here today, thank you as well. Your presence matters. And I think by the end of this morning, you'll feel a bit more motivated in this region to continue the dialogue. NVC is building a coalition to champion NOVA's competitiveness, and NOVA Rise is part of that call to action. This program is about mobilization of leaders, of ideas, and of solutions for Northern Virginia's greatest challenges. The NOVA Roadmap has already done the hard work of identifying the challenges facing this region. You've seen the data. You know the stakes. What's needed now is action. You have a role here today. As NOVA Roadmap stakeholders, I urge you to lean into the discussion by sharing your perspective with other leaders in attendance, asking pointed questions of our panelists, and responding to the pulse surveys you'll see throughout the program. Between the panel discussions, something a little new that we're experimenting with, we'd love for your participation today, is between the panel discussions, our panelists and our moderators will be stationed in the main lobby. Please take advantage of these one-on-one opportunities to continue the conversation and to lean in a little bit more. And now, to get the program started, without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the stage Washington Gas Director of Corporate Communications and External Affairs, Lauren Brown.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lauren Brown, and I serve as the Director of Corporate Communications and External Affairs at Washington Gas. It's a pleasure to join you today and to be a part of a conversation that brings together leaders from across business, policy, and the community. The organizations represented in this room reflect what makes Northern Virginia such a dynamic and resilient region. I also want to thank the Northern Virginia Chamber for its leadership. The Chamber plays an important role in convening voices, supporting businesses, and keeping a focus on the issues that directly impact the region's economic growth. For Washington Gas, being a part of this region's growth is nothing new. One of our very first customers was the U.S. Capitol, where we helped light the halls of Congress. It's a simple fact that reflects how long we've been serving this region and how closely our history has been tied to its growth. From those early days, our focus has remained consistent, providing reliable, affordable energy today for the people and businesses that everyone can count on. We serve more than 1.2 million customers across the DMV, including more than 550,000 here in Virginia. Our employees live and work in the communities we serve, and our role goes beyond delivering energy. We invest in workforce development, partner with local organizations, and maintain long-standing relationships, like our work with the Northern Virginia Chamber, that support the region's economic vitality. As our country looks ahead to celebrate its 250th anniversary, Washington Gas will mark a milestone of its own, 178 years of evolution. The way we serve customers today is different than it was in 1848, but our core commitment to this region has never changed. That commitment is captured in how we talk about our role today. Here for the families who rely on affordable energy, here for the businesses that power this economy, and here for the communities we call home. Energy affordability is central to that promise. Natural gas remains one of the most affordable and reliable energy options available today. For heating homes and powering appliances, it is 3.5 times less expensive than electricity. And from a reliability standpoint, customers can count on us. On average, only 1 out of every 650 customers will experience an outage over the course of their entire lifetime. That affordability and reliability matter. They give businesses confidence to plan, to invest, and to innovate. And when businesses thrive, communities thrive. Looking ahead, Northern Virginia's continued success will depend on collaboration, clarity, and practical energy solutions. It will require preserving energy choice while meeting the needs of a growing and evolving region. Today's agenda reflects real issues shaping this region, from housing affordability to the growth of data centers. We appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this discussion, and I'm grateful for the leadership in this room. Together, we're not just responding to today's challenges, we're helping Virginia stay strong, competitive, and resilient for the next 250 years. Thank you for your participation today. Now, I would like to welcome to the podium Anthem Blue Cross Blue Shield RFP of Sales of Virginia, Rebecca Fallon.
Good morning. My name is Rebecca Fallon with Anthem Blue Cross and Blue Shield, and it's an honor to be here at the inaugural Nova Rise event as a 30-plus year resident of the region. At Anthem, we often talk about health in terms of clinical outcomes, but we know that health doesn't start in the doctor's office. It starts where we live, where we work, and where our children and all of us play. We understand that health is inextricably linked to the stability of our environment. When a family is burdened with the cost of their mortgage, or a worker has a long commute because they can't afford to live in the community they serve, it creates a ripple effect of stress and instability that impacts our region's well-being. In a nutshell, housing affordability impacts the region's well-being and Northern Virginia's overall competitiveness. The experts joining us on stage for our first panel are navigating the complexities of housing affordability. Through the panel, we will learn more about the policies and practices that are moving the needle in Nova, as well as other regions across the country that have seen success in tackling critical issues. The goal is that we all walk away from this session with concrete actions and tangible solutions that we can champion together as a unified business community. And this is why Anthem is so proud to be a supporter of NVC. NVC knows how to take us from conversation to concrete action. And now I'd like to introduce the panelists and our moderator for today's conversation on the business case for housing affordability. It is my supreme pleasure to announce Dan Albin, Strategic Advisor and co-founder of YIMBYs of Nova, Thomas Fleetwood, Director, Fairfax County Department of Housing and Community Development, Evan Goldman, Executive Vice President, Land Acquisition and Development, EYA, and moderating this panel is Carmen Romero, President and CEO of True Ground Housing Partners. Thank you.
Okay, guys, let's dig in. I want to start off first with, you hear a lot about housing affordability. What is the reality on the ground here in Northern Virginia? Is there a specific housing stock that we're lacking? From your vantage point, Tom, why don't you start? And then, Evan, I'm going to ask you to jump in, too.
Sure, and first of all, good morning, everyone, and thanks to the Chamber for this event and for all of your incredibly important work in our community. Fairfax County needs more housing, period. It needs more housing of all income types, all income levels, and all types, really. And we need to move forward as quickly as we can to deliver as much housing as we can in the community.
Amen.
Got an amen from the person from YIMBY. But yes, it is all housing of all income levels is critically important.
And I've heard you say in the past, and this was like a year ago, and I'm in the business, and it really hit me when you talked about the number of permits today versus 2008. Can you ground for folks in the room who maybe aren't in those details?
Sure.
What's happened?
Sure. We recently completed a housing needs assessment, which we presented to our Board of Supervisors in February. And one of the very interesting things that we found was that in the decade between 2013 and 2023, there had been about 20-some thousand new units of housing of all incomes delivered in our community. But through our regulatory process, our board had approved 95,000 units. So there is a deficit between what's being delivered and what's being approved through our regulatory processes that is a real challenge for us.
That's helpful. Well, Evan, first describe what you build and how you see the reality on the ground today.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for having me. So EYA, traditionally, we started as a townhome development company back in the 90s, and we now do a mix of urban infill, townhomes, neighborhoods, as well as apartments. We used to do condos. We don't do those anymore. All throughout the region, but heavily in Fairfax County and in Alexandria and Arlington as well. So that's our product type. We like to think of ourselves as community builders. We try to create great places, so parks and open spaces and amenities that go along and create a walkable lifestyle for the residents in these new projects. And when we think about the housing crisis, we think of it in kind of two buckets. So number one, 100% we're not meeting our goals in delivering housing. There's a supply-demand gap, and when you have a supply-demand gap, you have rising prices. And we often get, from that perspective, you often hear, yeah, but everything you're delivering is, luxury empty nester townhomes, or you're delivering luxury apartments. Yes, and, right? Like, there's a great book by Yoni Applebaum called Stuck, where he talks specifically about the chain of housing and the fact that when you provide those units at the top end of the market, you're opening up units throughout the whole chain. And that's how you get people moving, and that's how you get units where you have people who could afford more who are living in units that really need to go to those who can't afford. And so we have a supply-demand gap we need to solve, number one. And then secondly, you have the housing problems for those who are at the more affordable end of the spectrum, where they can't even afford the housing that is at the lowest end of the market. And most jurisdictions have inclusionary zoning, as you know. Most jurisdictions do what they can to try to really focus on that area, which is important. But there's always a lack of equity or capital required to really build what we need to build to serve that part of the market. And so we try to come at it creatively in two different ways. We are a home builder. We're very proud to be building housing and providing housing units for our residents. We've delivered more than 7,000 homes in our 30 years in the region. But then we look for ways to partner, whether it's with supervisors or jurisdictional leaders or affordable housing developers like True Ground. If we have a really big piece of land and we want to absorb that site and deliver it all at once, there's room for that great luxury multifamily building, and there's room for an affordable building, and there's room for luxury townhomes, and there's room for affordable townhomes, and there's room for a whole mix of things, and we try to be creative in how we partner with people, and that's how we kind of tackle it. Our goal, we tend to hire people who, from a mission perspective, care about housing and affordability, and so as a result, we're never looking at a site and just saying, how do we get the most luxury housing out of this? It's more, how do we create a community that's diverse? How do we create a community that has the whole spectrum of housing? And then we're creative in trying to figure out how we solve that problem.
Okay, well, let's start at the beginning of how do we get more housing. And, as a developer, I will say navigating a community process in this region, in Northern Virginia, takes sometimes 1, 2, 3, I've even seen 7 years, right?
25 in Tacoma.
25 in Tacoma. So that is certainly part of what we are up against if we're going to change this trend. So I'm very fortunate to have groups like the one that Dan founded in this region doing the work. Can you share what YIGBY is and how it's showing up in Virginia?
Sure. So YIMBY stands for yes in my backyard, as opposed to the NIMBYs who are opposed to everything happening in their backyard. Sure, they might be in favor of affordable housing, but only if it's somewhere on the other side of town, not in their neighborhood or somewhere near them. And YIMBY started out in San Francisco, a place where there's considerable resistance to development and more housing. A lady named Sonia Traus, who founded YIMBY, about 10, 15 years ago, realized that every single housing project was getting delayed so long that it wasn't actually getting built. And so she decided to organize some of her neighbors to show up at some of these hearings where there were 50, 60, even more local neighbors coming out to say, no, we don't want an apartment, a tall apartment building in our neighborhood. She and a few neighbors showed up to say, yes, we need more housing. Look at the cost of rent. There's no way we're going to get rent down if we don't build more housing. And eventually, YIMBY became a national nonprofit organization. I'm on the board of the C3, which is known as YIMBY Law, but there is also a C4 with over 70 chapters nationwide called YIMBY Action. And somewhat independent of that, locally, in 2021, I co-founded YIMBYs of Nova. We weren't originally part of YIMBY Action, but we joined later. And the idea was to do the same thing Sonia Traus had done in San Francisco, but to do it here. And so we initially started off mostly in Arlington, Alexandria, and Falls Church. We would show up at meetings about approvals for housing. We got involved in the missing middle housing issue in Arlington, the similar issues in Alexandria. And then we started spreading out. We started finding members in Fairfax and elsewhere in Northern Virginia. And so our goal initially, when we were quite small, was, well, we're going to show up, we're going to at least provide a little bit of a counterpoint to the NIMBYs who come and say, oh, we don't want this in our neighborhood, sure, it'd be great to have it somewhere. And we were going to kind of represent the interests and the voice of people who weren't there to testify, people who might live somewhere else, but if the housing was built, would move here and live in that housing. And so initially that was our goal, and we were kind of trying to give a little cover to city council, county board members who might want to approve housing and say, look, there are people here who support more housing, and even though it's maybe not a majority, there were at least a significant number of people who showed up. But several years into it, at the height of the missing middle housing hearings in Arlington, we were actually outnumbering the NIMBYs, and we had more people speaking out in favor of housing because everyone has seen the cost of housing in this area. And so it is something where YIMBYs are doing our best to advocate for housing and doing it at these city council hearings, at planning meetings, trying to let politicians know, local politicians, that we really want housing to be built, even if it's not housing that we personally are planning to move into.
Yeah, and as a developer, and Evan, I'm sure you can attest to this, when we are embarking on a project, we have to weigh we have projects we haven't even submitted a piece of paper on, and they hear we're looking at something, and there's a legal defense fund. And there are people FOIAing the county government every day. When is this coming? And we have to be realistic. We have limited resources. We cannot get entangled, even if we got to the finish line, with years of legal battles with people trying to hold us up, because that deteriorates the feasibility of building the housing. So it is a direct correlation to the lack of production, right, and where we have the gaps. So YIMBYs are a big deal to those of us who are trying to do this work and trying to build more, because it's representing the voices of the people that want to move here. And so thank you. I really want to say on behalf of all of us, you are doing really important work. But there are other new people in town that are coming with the other piece of this, which is capital. So I want you, Tom, to maybe reflect on what role can the business community play, specifically with the folks in this room, and what are you seeing work from Fairfax County's perspective?
Sure. We are very pleased as a facilitator, as a catalyst of affordable housing development in our community, to be on the leading edge of the partnership with the Amazon Housing Equity Fund. It is an outstanding example of how businesses step up to address a major challenge in our economy, and a major challenge for them as employers as well. Right here in the Tysons Urban Center, just as an example, we are building currently close to 1,000 units at 2 different metro stops. And one is a partnership with Carmen and True Ground Housing. Another is with a private developer based here in Tysons. My point is that Amazon is investing almost $100 million in those 2 projects together. And that capital from Amazon which is inexpensive and patient, is allowing those projects to move forward all together very, very quickly. That is a great model for our business community to consider. Perhaps not on that scale. I know we're not all Amazon, but a model where we are able to put together inexpensive and patient capital to produce that kind of result in our employment centers is a wonderful path forward. I would also suggest for our business community members who have large pieces of property, who have campus facilities, those sorts of things, to consider investing their land, like Fairfax County has, in the development of affordable housing. The cost of land is one of the most critical challenges that we have for the development of all housing, but of affordable housing in particular. And I would also recommend and let you know that we are open for business to partner with you on looking at those opportunities as well.
Evan, can you talk about the project we're working on in Arlington with you, and that was facilitated by land that Amazon donated?
Yeah, exactly. So Crystal House is a neighborhood. It's an existing apartment complex just south of Amazon's headquarters in Arlington County, where we partnered as the private sector housing provider with True Ground as the lead on the affordable housing side, and Amazon owned the land. They came in and essentially are funding the ability for that project to be not just preserved as existing affordable housing within the existing, I guess it was market rate affordable today, it's going to be preserved then as affordable long term, and then to densify that campus, as Tom was just mentioning, by building additional apartment buildings around it, both market rate and affordable, as well as some market rate townhomes, which help provide equity for gap funding or gap financing for the project in general. And it's a great model. I couldn't agree more. Amazon's this amazing partner in this region where they've put in hundreds of millions of dollars into housing throughout the region. And that's something that we definitely need more of, obviously. There's a huge housing gap. And what I don't think anyone's heart's in the wrong place. Like every politician we talk to in the market understands at this point the housing crisis. They understand the fact that we need more housing and we need it now, for the most part. Even, quite frankly, many of former community groups who might have been opponents to projects are now starting to come around through education and through, quite frankly, pressure from people like the YIMBY group. The hard part is the capital side. At the end of the day, there needs to be economics on the project that makes sense, so you can get debt, so you can get capital to build it. And there's almost always, when you're providing higher amounts of affordable housing or a fully affordable building, a gap in that financing, in that capital structure. Jurisdictions, Montgomery County is doing a pretty great job of funding that gap where they can. They're probably the leader in the region and probably the country at doing it. But we need to see capital in order to fund that gap. And the private sector, I don't think there's been a great connection in this market for employers of what it means to them when they can have more affordable housing and plentiful housing in their market, and what it means if their investment of X million dollars into local housing by providing that gap financing, which in the case of Amazon, they get that money back. It's money they're putting in and that they ultimately get returned just at a lower rate of return. But that gap financing allows projects to move forward in a state of market where you can almost not build anything. And so anyone in this room who's in the construction or development side knows that it's almost impossible to finance a multifamily building in this market right now. With the federal layoffs, with interest rates where they are, with construction costs not having come down yet, you basically can't finance a project. And so there's a gap with almost every deal, and figuring out creative sources to fund that gap is really critical if we want to build our way out of the problem.
Yeah, and I put Tom on the spot when we were doing the planning call and said, I hear over the years a lot of employers interested in how can I play an active role in the development of housing because I have a workforce that I know is commuting and I want to participate in this. And they're daunted by, like, I'm not Amazon, to your point, Tom. But I do think there is a moment where perhaps, and this is the convener where we can start to unpack what that could look like, Tom and a housing agency like Tom's could create a workforce fund that employers can contribute to that can be bundled in an Amazon-like way to be the mezz debt for housing in Northern Virginia and contribute, it's not 3.6 billion like Amazon's doing, but millions, and that will directly drive solutions because they are going to be tapped out. I mean, we are fortunate, but they're in 3 regions, and that is not a forever proposition. So we as a community need to have others step up. So I hope that resonates, and if so, you could see us afterwards in the hallway,
take
and
checks.
we'll start some MOUs, and we'll
You know
get
what?
going.
I know when Amazon first came up with this idea of doing this within this region, they had assumed or hoped that other major corporations would join them and there would be almost like a housing bank, a regional housing bank or a regional infrastructure bank, ways that you can fund the biggest cost for new development, which often is infrastructure or subsidizing affordable housing. And that didn't really happen in the way they hoped it would. And so there is an opportunity working together. I know COG is focused on this.
Yes.
ULI is focused on this. I'm the vice chair. And there's many organizations like this around that the more we can partner as advocacy groups together and figure out how to solve these types of issues, the better. And whether it's some sort of regional housing bank or jurisdiction-based housing bank to provide that capital would be amazing.
Okay, I want to get Dan back in the mix here. So we're going to stay focused on Virginia for a minute, and then after that, we're going to talk kind of outside of Virginia as a region. So Dan, there's a lot of exciting things happening in Virginia in the General Assembly, and that's pro-housing. Can you bring people up to date in terms of the progress that we've made in the last few months?
Sure. So I think we're actually still learning about some of it because a couple of the more prominent housing bills, like the YIGBY bill, the Yes in God's Backyard, that would allow churches and similar institutions to use their property to construct housing in conjunction with the church, sometimes underneath, sometimes above, sometimes just on land they're not really using. That bill was sent back by the governor with amendments, and so we're still waiting to find out what's going to happen with that bill. There's a few others that were also sent back with amendments. Good news is there were a few bills that did pass. There was a bill that expedites the process, or at least encourages localities to create a process to expedite affordable housing that may make it considerably easier for developers to move forward with affordable housing projects and possibly with general housing projects, so long as affordable housing is a substantial component of the housing project. And there was also a bill passed that, again, encourages localities to reduce their lot size requirements in at least one residential area. So these are kind of small and maybe good first step type improvements, but we're looking for some of the bigger bills to pass. We're hopeful that the YIGBY bill will pass because Northern Virginia, even before the statewide legislation, has been kind of one of the leaders nationwide in YIGBY type development. There are churches and other religious institutions in both Arlington and Fairfax, elsewhere in Northern Virginia, that have already completed some of these projects, begun some of these projects, adding hundreds of units, sometimes of affordable housing, to their community, and doing so as part of their mission. This isn't just some random thing. They're doing it because they recognize that part of their mission as a church is to help provide for those less fortunate, and one of the things that people need, obviously, is housing. And since they have land, they're not really putting to its fullest use, and in some cases, some of these churches are maybe underattended or don't really need the full size of the church. They're able to redevelop some of that property into housing while still maintaining the church on the property, still continuing with their mission. And so this is something where it pairs the religious mission of the church or other institution with providing for the less fortunate, providing for people who need housing. And this is something we really need. And I'm hopeful that the amendments that the governor proposed don't undercut the YIGBY bill too much, and that the YIGBY bill is able to pass.
Yeah, we are following it as well, and I have my colleague here, Camilla from Wesley Housing. She and I think between both of us, 10% of our portfolio has been done in conjunction with redevelopment of land owned by houses of worship. And they're not just, even beyond housing. We've managed to build daycare centers, economic incubators, feeding kitchens. I mean, it is incredible, the impact that a faith community that's there long-term, kind of helping catalyze community. These are groups that have been there sometimes 100 years in that community, that have dwindled from 200 people to 20, who are sitting on really strategic assets. This could be a game changer. Let's let Tom brag for a minute. What are you and Fairfax as a public agency doing to be innovative in this moment? Where are you leading?
Thanks for that, Carmen. We are extraordinarily proud of the work that we do in affordable housing here in Fairfax County, and we are truly a leader now nationally. And that's thanks to a number of factors and a number of approaches that we're taking. Factor number one is the incredible leadership that we get from our Board of Supervisors, who have given us an extraordinarily ambitious goal of delivering 10,000 new affordable housing units by 2034. But they've also backed that up with real resources to make that happen. Just to kind of give you an idea, the Commonwealth of Virginia in their last budget, the per capita investment in new affordable housing development was about $9. In Fairfax County, it's almost $40 per person. And the importance of that and that kind of support cannot be understated in terms of how we're able to move forward. We are about 30% of the way to our goal in terms of the housing that's been delivered or is now under construction. And we have a huge pipeline of projects because of that support from our Board of Supervisors. I will also say that in terms of innovation is everything that we do is through a public-private partnership. We view ourselves as being, I used the word a catalyst earlier, we truly view ourselves as part of the entrepreneurial ecosystem that delivers housing and most importantly, affordable housing here in our community. So we do all of our projects through public-private partnerships because we believe, and through our experience, we have found that our private partners in the nonprofit and for-profit sectors do this work the best. So we have become very nimble, very adept at working with our private partners to deliver all sorts of affordable housing, from the two large projects that are going on here in Tysons to our first building repurposing for affordable housing in Merrifield, to a repurposing of a long fallow piece of property on the Richmond Highway corridor. Those partnerships and our ability to deliver to our private partners is absolutely essential. Our Board of Supervisors has also, in addition to dollars, has invested land. And publicly owned land has made all of the difference in our ability to move forward in affordable housing. If any of you have been out to the Government Center lately, there is an apartment building, a beautiful apartment building that's being constructed on the front parking lot of the Fairfax County Government Center. That's affordable housing. And that's being built there because our Board of Supervisors decided we're going to invest our land in this priority. And I'm very proud of the work we're doing using publicly owned land. The public dollar resources that go into our projects are leveraged at least 4 to 1, usually far more than that. And the kinds of innovative partnerships that we've been able to put together to deliver housing, I think, truly lead the nation. I'll put in one last element of this is that in Fairfax County we have a housing authority that is a separate political subdivision of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And if you're an insomniac and would like to hear more about that, I can talk with you afterwards. But my point is that the housing authority is the county's local housing finance agency and is able to bring tools to the table, both in terms of our federal resources and financial instruments, that is able to make these projects happen as well. So if any jurisdiction is well positioned to address both the challenge of housing writ large and most especially the challenge of affordable housing, it is Fairfax County, and we are open for business.
But we still have a housing crisis. So that means that whatever we are doing within Fairfax is part of a larger ecosystem of Virginia and the ecosystem of the region. What are other people doing better than Virginia that we can draw inspiration from? And Evan, I'm going to start with you regionally. You do work in DC, you do work in Maryland, and maybe even in other jurisdictions that aren't Fairfax. Are there things that we can learn that you see that are successful other places?
Yeah, so we work in almost every jurisdiction in the region at this point, pretty balanced between Virginia and Maryland and DC, which we lump more together. Yeah, there's some innovation. I'd say every jurisdiction is recognizing we're in crisis, which is much better than where we were 10 years ago, and I think that wasn't even agreed upon. In DC, the mayor tried to do something very bold. She was proposing a $500 million housing fund to provide gap financing for affordable and mixed income projects, and critical there being also for mixed income projects, because those are equally important. Unfortunately, in DC, as you know, first of all, COVID hit. Secondly, federal workforce is being laid off. The council there kind of stubbed their own toe by starting to talk about having rent growth caps. And so all of that combined for a pretty anemic investment market in DC, which then makes it harder economically to have this huge fund. So hopefully that will come back. But the most recent tools that the district is looking at are tax abatements for increasing affordable housing. So essentially it's basically automatic. There's a bill going through right now that just got proposed that would provide, if you are in federal land or WMATA land within the district, basically if you do 20% affordable at a mix of 60 and 80% AMIs, you get a 20-year tax break, zero taxes for 20 years. Montgomery County has a similar piece of legislation where if you come to the table with a higher level of affordability in the 20 to 25% range of the units you're delivering, you get an automatic tax break of a certain amount. Similar, if you're trying to convert old office buildings that have failed into residential, even if it means tearing down the building and building housing where that building once stood, because most of the existing office buildings are obsolete, you get major tax breaks for doing that and reductions in fees. So the biggest issue for providing housing is the cost to provide it is here and the rents are a certain place, especially if you want affordable housing, which is lower rents. And so the economics just don't necessarily pencil. So there's a gap. And then what can the jurisdiction do creatively to try to figure out how you fund that gap? There's a few ways to do it. One is certainly tax breaks and tax incentives. The other, Montgomery County, they've dramatically reduced the approval process timeframe, so you can generally get through approvals in 6 months if you're doing a high amount of affordable housing. That's another thing that the jurisdictions can do to reduce the thrash, the cost, the carrying costs, the time frame, all the soft costs involved in how you get housing produced, and have more certainty that you're going to actually get to the finish line. And that's being done there pretty successfully. And when they opened that up, they almost automatically had a whole bunch of applications that came to the table interested in moving forward more quickly. Parking is another area. DC, they got rid of parking minimums essentially, and they now have parking maximums. And so if you want to build an apartment building in Washington, DC, it is almost impossible to provide more than one parking space for 3 apartments. So think about that. That is 1/6 of the Fairfax County requirement, I think. It is 1/3 of most of the jurisdiction.
And the cost for one parking space, I just priced, it's between $50,000 and $80,000
$80,000
parking spot to go underground.
Exactly. So you think about gap financing, you're trying to fund a $400,000 unit, you've got a gap of $50,000 to $80,000. Well, if I don't have to provide that $80,000 parking space, all of a sudden I can provide that housing unit. So I think people kind of poo-poo this, and they often will give in to interest groups that are nervous about less parking. But we have plenty of housing units throughout the region that have big driveways and tons of parking. If somebody wants a house with 3 parking spaces, they can find it. But we don't have a lot of units near transit with almost no parking for those many of us who take Uber or take transit or have other means of getting around, or maybe they're, I don't know, a divorced parent with 3 kids and they only need 1 space, not 2. So thinking about how parking costs really impact housing is really important, and any other levers we have to reduce the price of providing housing. And then lastly, I do think jurisdictions are starting to recognize that there are so many priorities. You really have to figure out what your main priority is. If housing is your main priority, then maybe you also can't increase stormwater management regulations right now. Maybe you can't also require more open space on the ground level. Maybe you can't also provide $2 million of proffers for various things. We have to think about, as a region, if housing is the number one issue that we have, let's make sure that we're focusing on how we provide that first, and then also do the things we can, but not kill projects with so many demands on costs.
Okay, Dan, take us home. Nationally, what state is getting it right and why?
Well, I
Or
think
states.
there are several states that are making a lot of progress, but I think the leading light nationwide is Austin, Texas. From 2015 to 2024, Austin added 120,000 housing units, way more, at a way greater rate than any other city in the country. And in just the last 3 of those years, they added half of those units. 60,000 units were added between 2022 and 2024. Now, Austin achieved this by taking a variety of different steps. There's no single magic bullet. They expedited the processing of permits. They addressed parking, first by reducing parking minimums and then by eliminating them altogether in 2023. They made it much easier to build ADUs and to build more dense housing. They did some rezoning. They did a number of things to reduce lot sizes and to reduce minimum square footage requirements. It was a combination of a whole bunch of things, but that led to a tremendous amount of housing being built in a relatively short period of time. Now, Austin is not the only place nationwide that is doing well in terms of its laws on housing, and I think a couple others I'd point to would be California, which is maybe counterintuitive, but when you're on the leading edge of the housing crisis, that gives you reasons to develop better laws to fix the problems with the housing crisis. So California and then Montana. Montana sort of looked at California and said, oh my God, we don't want to become like that. We need to do something about this before it really hits. And the reason it was a concern in Montana is because during the COVID pandemic, the cost of housing went up dramatically in a number of western states like Idaho and Montana. You saw housing prices go up by 50% in less than a year. And because lots of people were moving out of very urban areas, they wanted to live somewhere a little more rural, a little more mountainous, out in the wilds for obvious reasons. And so, but places like Kalispell, places like Missoula, places like Boise saw incredibly high housing costs in a very short period of time. And so Montana and California both have by right development of ADUs, by right development of duplexes. California has a number of essentially housing targets that are enforceable. And so my organization, YIMBY Law, the national nonprofit, actually sues municipalities to make sure they're hitting these enforceable housing targets. And that kind of makes them accountable for these targets that they set. Now, those targets are often not really that high, that ambitious, but at least they're enforceable, and they can go and make sure that these municipalities are actually developing more housing and approving more housing that they say that they set a target, but you don't always have to hit your target. In California, if you don't hit that minimum target, you can get sued. And so those are some of the ways, some of the innovations that we've seen that are leading to more housing nationwide.
Wow, okay. Well, I think we are at the time for questions, and we've got a bunch in here. If, let's see.
Oh, wow.
Wow, okay.
I love the upper left one.
I've heard a lot about big corporations buying family homes and putting up McMansions. I've seen this several times in my neighborhood. Is that really impacting the housing market? Evan, do you want to, since this is your single-family home ownership part of the world, how is McMansions?
That's such a loaded question.
Well, we want to keep it animated and
yeah. So, I mean, there's a few ways you could fix that, right? Like we could look at our sorry, there's like an echo if you guys are hearing it, but we could look at our single-family zoning and allow duplexes and triplexes and quad units on single-family lots. And then when somebody buys a house, which, in Fairfax County, the average house might be $600,000 to $800,000. When they buy that lot and they can build 2 or 3 smaller houses on it, that provides much more housing at more affordable pricing. But because of zoning in general, the only way to make any money by buying that house and building something new is to build the big, 4,000 square foot McMansion. So there are ways to handle that from a zoning perspective. Based on the tone of that question, I'm not sure that person would like that answer. But from a corporation perspective, it is true, especially during COVID, that there were private equity firms going out and buying single-family homes and then renting them out throughout the market, or sometimes renovating them and renting them out. I think that's a bigger issue than corporations building McMansions. And that does put somewhat of a chill on the housing market because it's taking for sale housing out of the supply and replacing it with for rent housing, which is needed, but maybe not in those specific locations. So that's a problem. I think that pales in comparison to the larger issues we have, which is not having enough housing and enough affordable housing in the markets where we really need it. So I tried not to get distracted by issues that are maybe tangential but not core, and let's really focus on what's core.
Tom, a question in response to your recognition of the difference between the entitled homes in Fairfax and what's being built. Can you dig in a little bit why you think that is?
So a few things that I'll say about that is that I think it is highly challenging in this environment right now to get financing, especially to build market multifamily housing. So it is in part a question of what the money's willing to pay for right now. I think it's pretty telling that for quite some time here in the Tysons Urban Center, for example, the only two projects that had cranes up were the two affordable housing projects that were being built. I think there are a wide variety of factors that are impacting this, but I think sort of the end of that question is what to do. And what I wanted to point out is that our Board of Supervisors has recognized that this is a huge challenge. And Chairman McKay, in September of last year, essentially drafted and presented legislation that directed an all-of-county government effort to understand why housing production has been challenged, and what changes, what creativity can we institute to change that trend. We are preparing to make our recommendations to the Board of Supervisors on May the 12th, but we are looking at a wide toolbox of ideas that range from financing innovation for affordable housing to development process streamlining, how to make things easier, faster, and cheaper to get to the market. And we are really excited about that step forward as kind of housing 2.0 in Fairfax County, and how we move those kinds of things forward and get more housing delivered in the market.
Yeah, and I would say, with the time I spent with other developers, Virginia in the region is a little bit of the shining star in terms of the amount of development that's happening, and we are still anemic to when we look at places like Texas and other places where they're building more housing and rents are lower. So all of the enabling legislation that you're seeing come through with the General Assembly that gives the localities the flexibility to expedite things, to reduce tax burdens, and oftentimes you don't have those taxes today if you're talking about a church or, and you allow that to move forward quickly, that allows folks to borrow more money. And in turn, that will expedite in a moment like this. So these could be short-term fixes to get production going, knowing the moment that the region is in. So I really think being creative, and we do need to be at a 2.0 if we're going to accelerate, which is, I think, what we are all trying to do as a region. And we need to cooperate regionally more. I do feel like, and Evan, maybe you can talk about this as someone else who's also in the region, what can we do to get Virginia to work with Maryland and DC that you think might work around housing?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we've been, ULI partnered with COG, NAOP, DCBIA, Coalition for Smarter Growth. I'm sure I'm going to miss some other organizations that we were involved with, but we put on a future forum over the last few years where we've talked about this exact issue. How do you create collaborative cooperation across the regions to deal with basically infrastructure investment and housing investment, right? We're not going to grow economically as a region and we're not going to continue to be competitive if we can't grow in those two major areas. And it's sparked a lot of interest and excitement. We have been continuing to have meetings with COG about a way for them to lead in this area, since they have the ability to pull together all the elected leaders throughout the region, where we can start having these conversations collaboratively. They've already done a lot with housing targets, as you all know. If you're an elected leader throughout this region, that was something that they led the effort on. And then the next step is maybe we do end up one day with a housing bank or an infrastructure bank or some way to fund these initiatives regionally. How do we connect our region better from a transit perspective, so you can live in one jurisdiction that might be less expensive and work in the other, and then affordable housing is really a regional, has a regional prism to it. So there are some of these solutions, and then more than anything, really learning from each other. I think every jurisdiction does certain things really well, and so learning throughout the region what we can learn from our partner jurisdictions and also incorporate into our jurisdiction could be really helpful. And those are the types of educational opportunities we want to provide.
And I think the business community has to play a role in this. It can't just be driven by elected leaders and government.
Yep.
I know the Greater Washington Partnership, I understand, has got also a table that's being convened around housing.
Yep.
And I would very much love to see this group become actively involved in what does this 2.0 look like for Northern Virginia. Well, I think based on this giant clock back there, I think we might be over time. So I'm going to thank our panelists, and I know they're going to try to keep the program moving, so we're going to exit stage left and meet in the hallway and continue the conversation with anyone who would like. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
We're gonna take one-
and our enterprises use, and now increasingly with AI, all runs on computers that sit inside these buildings. Early, I would say maybe 2010s to 2015, the data center asset class was quite niche. Now it's become very much institutional in its management, both in terms of capital flows and risk management. We do think of the unit economics of data centers to be in megawatts, to your point, Mark. Certainly, there are traditional real estate metrics on square footage in terms of cost, but the way the industry is geared is how much power can you bring. Buildings are measured by their megawatt capacity. Campuses are measured by their megawatt capacity. And the reason for that is because the engine behind the data center is in fact the power. So from a development standpoint, everything we do, from partnering with our utility partners in energy procurement to sizing out the building and then ultimately leasing out or working with our end users, is all geared towards a megawatt basis.
So to build on that a little bit, I worked on my first data center project, as a couple of folks in the room know, back in 1999, where we took a Heckinger's hardware store over off of 123 across from the toll road building and turned it into, I think, a roughly 15,000 square foot data center with one backup generator and probably 150 kilowatts of power. Fast forward to 2015 to 2020, the largest data center buildings that were getting built were 36 megawatts. So, incredible scale over that time period. Now, it's typical that a building would be north of 100 megawatts of power for the building as sort of the standard size. So, Bill, when we think about the difference between, say, what I'm talked about in 1999 and buildings that are over 100 megawatts per building, what does that mean for Dominion?
Let me try to illustrate. First, who is an energy expert in the room, or you think yourself as an energy expert? Because if you are, go get a cup of coffee, because I'm going to do averages, not nuance. And in energy, we love nuance. So 150 kW, which you use first, that would be a really big convenience store. Not as big as a Buc-ee's maybe, but it'd be a really big, it'd be among our biggest Wawas or Sheets that we serve. That'd be 150 kW. A megawatt or two, a megawatt's about 250 homes. A megawatt or two would be a big box store, and a high end of a big box store. 25 megawatts would be a chemical factory, and a really big one. 100 megawatts, you would be building nuclear aircraft carriers or submarines, or an extremely large paper mill. 1,000 megawatts is what we call a gigawatt. I'd worked at Dominion 15 years might have heard the term gigawatt 2 or 3 times in 15 years. It's now as common to express load in, not necessarily for individual customers. When we talk about load growth, we no longer do it in megawatts. We talk in gigawatts. That's a logarithmic change. That's a 1,000-fold step change in how we denominate power generation. So if you think about Dominion, we don't have most of the land area in Virginia. We have actually a surprisingly small amount of land area. It's less than 40%, but we have most of the people. We've got about 70% of the people. It took us our entire corporate history, from the early 1900s to now, more than 100 years, to hit this very winter 25,000 megawatts peak load, 25 gigawatts. We expect to do that again in the next 10 years. So when you think about that, that is a tremendous step change. So I was told by a technology executive when I was on a panel in Arlington yesterday that this is a targeted ad. I assumed everybody got these kind of ads. Oh, he said, oh, that one's targeted at you. I was like, oh, thanks. Who gets these pop-up ads about, like, drink warm water with pink salt and lose belly fat? Who gets stuff like that? I think it's only me. There were some bills this year. I called them the one simple trick to fix the grid bills. If you just do that, these silly data centers and these silly utilities, if you just do X, Y, or Z, no problem. Everybody's right and everybody's a little wrong. They're right in saying you need my thing, whether it's the one simple trick, your type of generation, from solar to nuclear, we need it all, energy storage. Everybody's right about that part. They're wrong about the part, and you don't need anything else. This is very much a case when people say all of the above, literally we are the most all the above company in the United States. We're hosting a fusion pilot. Yes, that's now real. It's not speculative. We're hosting a pilot on fusion energy. We're building a very large offshore wind farm. We are the largest solar operator in our 13-state region. We don't talk about that enough, so I just did. The General Assembly just passed, and in this particular instance, the governor did relatively modest amendments to a groundbreaking energy storage bill. We have major natural gas plants, some of the largest, most efficient in the United States. We have all of those, and we're going to need whatever you like. We're doing a lot of it in the coming days. Whatever you don't like, we're doing a lot of that too. And we're also one of the nation's leading nuclear operators. Peggy covered that in the introduction. But the last thing I'll leave you with, those types of power generation, people like to sometimes play sort of fantasy energy policy. I like this, 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 and this. You know, like when you pick a fantasy football team, you got 9 quarterbacks and only 2 linemen. You know, because it's fun to pick quarterbacks, plus you know who they are. You don't necessarily know who the folks are who win football games, your line, your offensive line. Hashtag the Hogs, remember those guys? Remember back when the local team was good? The forms of energy are not interchangeable. A plant, Peggy used the term baseload. Baseload means we can make it run when we want and it can run all the time. Other things are very valuable because they don't have fuel sources. They buy down your fuel risk, but they run when the sun shines or the wind blows. And we can't make the sun dispatch and we can't make the wind blow. That doesn't mean they're both not valuable. It just means they're not interchangeable. And whenever we start talking in energy policy circles, like everything's interchangeable, that can be a problem. We'll get more into that as the panel sort of evolves. Guys, you want to correct anything I just said?
Perfect.
No. The only thing I would add is you talked about the 100-year, 120-year journey of Dominion.
Yeah.
That's 40 more states trying to do the same thing. This is a national explosion of demand.
Yeah, and by the way, on that thing about states, be careful when you compare states. Someone told me the other day, well, Texas is not comparing a bill like such and such. It's like, I'm not sure they're in session this year. They only meet every other year. So don't, when you've heard one state, you've heard one state. There's a little distinction among each state.
Yeah, so we're going to come back to that in a minute. But Brandon, I want to ask you from your perspective, Bill talked a little bit about the all of the above solution. What are you seeing at Washington Gas in terms of your role in the all of the above solution? Because traditionally I've thought of Washington Gas as I turn my oven on or I power my dryer or whatever it is, and that's sort of your limited role in this. What are you seeing from a natural gas perspective on how to contribute to the all of the above solution?
No, absolutely, and we fully agree with Bill and the folks at Dominion that an all of the above energy approach is the only way that the region will be able to meet our energy demands. So Washington Gas Light is a tri-state utility operating in DC, Maryland, and Virginia, 1.2 million customers, nearly 550,000 in the state of Virginia. And what we always focus on, whether we are talking to lawmakers, whether we're talking to local elected officials, is not to foreclose on any types of energy options. It's really going to take wind, solar, natural gas, electricity to meet the commercial demands that we're seeing in Virginia. Right now, this year, we will invest more than $230 million in upgrading aging infrastructure in the state. We have more than 6,000 mains of gas infrastructure in the state of Virginia, and we're ready on day one to help to support the needs of the data center community.
So let's build off of that last point you made about the investments that you're making. There's been a lot of news headlines and a lot of hand-wringing around increased energy costs in all sectors, right? How much of those energy cost increases are the result of, I'll say, reinvestment into your infrastructure versus satisfying new demand for energy services?
If I may start, I'll add a third, and that is we're buying the same stuff everybody else is. For a variety of reasons, and not pointing any political fingers, just economically true, from 2020 to now, we've had a step change in what stuff costs. And we buy those things too. We buy the same sort of labor supply, commodities, gas turbines, whatever it might be, that is buy. So there's just sort of overall inflation. And that's notable in energy because prices are so stable typically in both gas and electric utilities. There are the costs of new investments, and then there's costs of replacing things that you would want to replace anyway, because even the longest-lived energy assets eventually have the end of their useful life. We had a couple big oil units that we retired finally because we could no longer reliably guarantee they were peaking units. They started as base load in the 1960s when the federal government was incenting utilities to switch from coal to oil right before the first oil shock in 1973. Those units reached the point where we could no longer reliably count on them to run on the couple days a year that we needed them, so we retired them. On data centers or any other cost sort of calculation, the way a utility rate case works is the regulator does two really important things. First, they decide what would be a reasonable scope of investment for the utility. That's the first thing they do. And then the second thing they do is they allocate those costs among customer classes. And a very notable thing the Virginia State Corporation Commission did in its order last November is it created a new high load factor, large customer class, and for everybody but the long-standing industrial customers. You know, we energized, for example, our largest shipyard before World War I. I know that because it built battleships in World War I and was only able to do that because it was hooked up to what was then a nascent electric grid. What it said is we're going to actually deal with this question of what will happen if this is a boom and suddenly these customers aren't here to pay for all this infrastructure. It said, you know what, we're going to have a regime where these customers are guaranteeing that, and this is both backward-looking and forward-looking for all but these large industrial customers. In other words, I mean data centers. Yeah. 60% of generation costs, 85% of transmission and distribution costs. And the regulator was very well aware that was on the high end of what states were proposing. That was on the far part of the spectrum, and they chose, in their discretion, to do that. So it's not a one and done. Utility rate making, Virginia, I think wisely, and this has had some shifts over time, but generally in the last almost 20 years, Virginia's had a regime of biennial reviews every 2 years. And in a time when energy is changing so fast, that's probably a good cadence. There's been talk of trying to do it annually, but that wouldn't work because you'd lap one another. You wouldn't finish the first case before you start the next case. So 2 is on the frequent end of how utility reviews work, but I think probably wisely so in a state that's growing so much.
So just, I want to follow up on that point with you, which is, I'm going to get the number wrong, but maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, on a national scale, I heard that we built out roughly somewhere between 15 and 25 miles of new transmission line nationwide in terms of new transmission capacity. Again, I could get the numbers wrong, but it was a very low number relative to what you think about on a national scale. What is Dominion doing in terms of both replacing the grid system that you have had for decades upon decades versus adding new capacity to your grid network to be able to satisfy this demand?
Let's first talk about what a transmission line does. Transmission line moves electricity at high voltage from a power generator to a substation. What does a substation do? It steps down that transmission, that high voltage, to a voltage where you can distribute it to individual homes and businesses. That national trend, I'm not doubting you, that is less applicable to Virginia. Before anybody had heard of a data center, these guys had heard of data centers, but before any of the rest of you had heard of data centers, we were building a 500 kV backbone across our system, particularly in Northern Virginia. Why were we doing that? Because we had one of the fastest growing, most important regions in the country. Why are transmission lines something that you want on your system? First of all, it doesn't work without them because it means you have all these power generators that can't deliver any power, and that's not good, and then the lights go out. I had an aha moment the other day. I was on the phone with a senior care facility near where I live, and something I have never gotten rid of. In government, I did long-term care policy for a while, and to this day, 25 years later, long-term care facilities call me when the power is out. We restored that customer while I was on the phone with them, and I assure you that was not a line worker touching a single pole. It was transmission switching. We used to do that with a notebook and a log and an ink pen and a person, and now it's computer-enabled. I don't want to get in a scholastic argument whether that was machine learning, AI, or something else. The reason we were able to do that, it's just like when you drive to Northern Virginia and there's a wreck on I-95 or the Beltway, and thank goodness the leaders of Fairfax and the state and whomever was involved in this decision built 123 in the Fairfax County Parkway. And I realize 123's been here forever and ever, but since our office is right off the Fairfax County Parkway, love the Fairfax County Parkway. Transmission lines are like that. They're alternative routes. You'll notice the first night of a big power outage, hurricane, derecho, whatever, ice storm, we make the biggest jump in restoration. And yet, we haven't brought in all the crews from other states. In the case of an ice storm, it's not safe to be on the roads yet. How have we managed to restore all these customers? Transmission switching. The more transmission solutions you have, just like the more road solutions you have, and I realize we just did a panel which was not, and I'm not taking a position on this because I don't know anything, it was not all about cars, that last panel, but in this case, for the analogy, having more transmission lines is like having more roads, more options to serve customers, and in part because of the services data centers provide, we're able to do that now instantaneously.
Could I add a couple comments? So, you know, Bill, I sort of think of everything you described as you guys are rate makers, and we're on the data center side, the rate takers. We're rate payers, and we're on the user side of everything that Dominion and other utilities provide.
May I gently stop you? We're the rate proposer, and the commission's the rate maker.
Fair enough. So hopefully,
it's kind of like the governor proposes a budget, but a couple of the folks in the audience say yes or no to that. Yeah.
So appreciate that. Thank you for that. So. Couple things. I just wanted to point out that, at least from our perspective, the 500 kV lines that Bill just described are, you know, best in class. These are the industry, like leading in the industry in terms of robustness of infrastructure in the power world. On our side, you know, as a data center developer, if we have an opportunity to sort of have access to or tap into a 500 kV line versus a 345 or lower, 500 is the best. And I just want to point out that, you know, there are some benefits, of course, to the organic development of Northern Virginia as the #1 data center market in the world. And one of those things is, in part, you know, chicken and the egg, but certainly Dominion, I feel, is the most, if not among the most sophisticated and advanced utilities in the country on this topic. And I just want to point out that, you know, nationally, since we are working on projects across the country, there's certainly a trend, and I think there's a bit of a myth to be busted on the data center responsibility for raising costs on other ratepayers, but certainly there's a trend, as Bill just mentioned, where other utilities are, ensuring that data center developers and users are securing and or guaranteeing infrastructure upgrades, the cost associated with infrastructure upgrades to serve their load. And I think that's a point that gets very nuanced in terms of, letters of credit and guarantees and basically the financial instruments to provide assurances, contractual obligated assurances that, cost that's put into the grid to serve the data center load is in fact recouped. But certainly that's being codified in agreements across the country that we're working on, bar none.
So Kevin, with that as a little bit of background, can you talk a little bit about, from a policy standpoint, investment standpoint, how does the growth of the data center industry drive innovation in energy, whether it's in Virginia or help drive innovation in energy, whether it's in Virginia or elsewhere?
Sure. I was thinking about what Bill said about the New Virginia rate class and for data centers. And when you think about the last 2 to 3 years with this AI boom that nobody saw coming 5 years ago, maybe some people did, but it's unlike anything we've seen from a demand perspective. I just want to make the point that the hundreds of billions of dollars being spent by, let's just say, the Magnificent Seven companies that are kind of driving this at the capital markets level, big tech, that's a good thing for the country. I mean, we're talking about transmission lines in Virginia. It's happening in Texas. It's happening in Georgia, North Carolina. It's happening all around the country. And that is massive amounts and massive pools of private capital being invested back into critical infrastructure that everybody uses. That is a very good thing. If you look back over the last 25, 30 years with respect to electricity demand in the United States, it's relatively flat. I mean, it's going to be different, by, single digits, but it's essentially tracked the rate of inflation. So we're now going into a hockey stick demand environment. We talked earlier about all of the above energy. It's funny, I've spent 20 years mostly in Washington at the federal level, and everybody has always said all of the above. But both, if we're being honest here, both political parties have kind of favored their own forms of energy. I like to say that those are luxuries of a flat demand environment. When you don't have exponential demand growth in electricity and energy, you can kind of say, okay, I'm going to choose this energy versus this energy. We now are entering a phase where battery storage is going to be a huge driver in the energy conversation, which just 5 years ago, when the IRA passed, it incentivized battery storage with taxpayer funds. Now you've got the biggest companies in the world doing anything they can to get batteries to store energy. That's a very positive thing if you're a clean energy proponent, storage proponent, just as if you are a pipeline and natural gas proponent. You're now seeing pipelines that are going to get built in New York State and hopefully provide lower cost Marcellus Shale molecules to New England, to my parents who live in Massachusetts that are paying very high utility rates. So that's all. I say all that because it's a very good thing for the country. I think we're going to get back to a more balanced energy and electricity policy, and that's because of hundreds of billions of dollars of private capital investment into data centers. And Virginia's the leader on that. There's no question. We are sitting in, as we all know, the data center capital of the world, and the rest of the country looks to policies here at the local level, at the state level, as the model. I spent the last 10 years, I joined Digital 8 months ago. I spent the last 10 years in the chemical industry, which of course I now like to say I've gone out of the frying pan and into the fire. And it accelerated faster than even I could have anticipated. But the industry's adjusting to the new environment. I think regulators are adjusting to the new environment. Utilities, Bill, you've been at Dominion 15 years. I'm sure what you're dealing with now is very different than what you were dealing with 3, 5, 7 years ago.
20, sadly.
Yeah, so I mean, I say all that because I think this is a great story. But right now, the news media, as they often do, will take what I like to say are growing pains. And by the way, there are growing pains with this industrial buildup. That's a real thing. But I think the country, states, localities, and I think Loudoun County is the national leader in this, have the capability to manage what I think are growth pains. But this is a good thing, and there's demand for it.
So Brandon, I want to come back to you a little bit and talk about the natural gas component in all of this. And one of the things that we're seeing nationally, and to a certain extent in Virginia so far, is looking at what I'll describe as behind-the-meter solutions or islanded energy generation facilities where they're not connected to the grid and sort of function behind the meter, meaning you're not part of the utility, right? You're operating your own facility. And all the big seven, as Kevin described, at a national level, have made pledges to bring their own capacity to these large data center campuses so that you're not putting further strain on the grid. And natural gas seems to be one of the leaders in terms of the sources of that energy. Do you think that is, from a natural gas perspective, do you think that trend will continue? Where do you see the industry fitting into that long term, and what investments do you need to make to be able to serve that role?
Yep, absolutely. Great question. So yes, the behind-the-meter generation is absolutely a solution. We announced earlier this year a data center project in Maryland, 24 megawatts. We're very excited about it. Over the last year plus, we have commissioned a number of engineering studies for similarly situated facilities in DC, Maryland, and Michigan, where we also have a natural gas utility. I think the biggest thing that counties and states can do is to provide clarity and swiftness when we think about permitting, when we think about regulatory regimes, when we think about policy and legislative focuses on how we can make these investments. When we think about the investments that we have to make on some of our infrastructure across the region, we're going after the oldest, leakiest infrastructure that has to be replaced in order to keep up with the commercial needs that exist today and that exist tomorrow. And that's not even looking at how we will grow and build new pipeline infrastructure around the region to help meet some of that demand.
So, Bill, I want to pivot on this and come to you next. Obviously, Dominion sits sort of in the middle of all of this, right? Where you have natural gas generation that you use, you provide the public utility component of supporting and empowering the grid, but there's also a shortfall in the near term of available capacity to meet the demand or enough energy to meet the near-term demands around this. What's Dominion's view of these islanded or slightly different behind-the-meter power solutions where the data centers are not immediately reliant on Dominion and the grid to service the need? How do you view that in the short term and in the long term, how all these pieces fit together?
I'll say a couple of things. What president do you think first got really focused on customer self-generation? It's not, come on, take a guess.
What president?
Yeah, which president? He's no longer alive, is your hint. President Carter, Public Utility Regulatory Policy Act of here I'm remembering, 78, might have been 79, I think it was 78. So customer generation has been the law for a really long time. What does behind the meter mean? It sounds like this really cool thing. Behind the meter means in a wrath of God moment, we can't use the resource to keep the lights on because we can't access it. You can have customer self-generation in front of the meter. So the other thing I think is important to note on this, and I'm not saying it's a bad concept, the concept has been around since the 70s. President Carter, if you look at a lot of the regulatory world we live in today, is Jimmy Carter's world, whether it's airlines, some of the outlines of the electricity world. He's very focused. Good book on that, Profits of Regulation. Talks about Carter's role in that. But in any event, there is no generation resource that works 100% of the time. We are, I don't like to think, I do believe, and we are, and I think demonstrably we're the best nuclear operator in the country, maybe on the planet, probably on the planet. A really well-run nuclear unit runs 94% of the time without accounting for the fact that it needs to be refueled every 18 months. A great gas combined cycle, high 80s, low 90s, nothing runs all the time. So it is possible to design a facility which is entirely islanded, but in most cases where you're talking about customer self-generation, you're still connected to the grid for backup power, or maybe in a lot of applications when I hear customer self-generation, I hear for part of the campus, not all of the campus, for an expansion of the campus, for a temporary period of time until there's other resources that come online. So again, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. There is no, I'll use the Lord of the Rings analogy because I'm kind of a nerd like that. There is no one ring to rule them all. There's a lot of solutions. So if you want to think about energy policy, I'm going to give an homage to the greatest leadoff hitter ever, Rod Carew, Minnesota Twins. He might have hit 10 home runs in his whole life. Yeah, I'm exaggerating. I'd probably do a few more than that. But he always got on base. So there's no one home run solution to anything. This is a matter, Minnesota Twins, 1980s. A lot of singles, a lot of walks, occasional hit by the pitch, because Nolan Ryan was around in those days. And it's a lot of good solutions. There's no one home run solution. But when you say you're going to go totally off the grid, that is a lot harder to do than you might think.
Yeah, and I just want to say, as obviously a data center owner and operator that has significant demand needs, we want to be with the utility. Like no data center company, or frankly manufacturer, depending on the industry, they have redundancy, they have expertise, they have 125 years of delivering electricity 100% of the time to all their customers. Obviously, demand environment has changed, but if you talk to the business leadership of a data center company, a big tech company, the idea that you know, we're now going to on-site generation, that's a very big challenge that's not core to the business model of a data center. I want to ask the audience, because you proposed it, or you asked the question, on the natural gas issue. How many people here know who George Mitchell is?
What?
George Mitchell.
George Mitchell, former senator?
Oh, great.
Not a former senator.
Not the former senator?
The other George Mitchell. Does anybody here know who George Mitchell is? All right, well, grab your phone and Google it at some point. That'll go through a data center. George Mitchell commercialized hydraulic fracturing. I would argue, that was the most consequential technological innovation of the last 30 years alongside the internet. Because what it did was it allowed our country to tap molecules that have tremendous wealth creation and value. And the person that I really give a ton of credit to that understood this was President Obama. Because in 2015, he signed federal legislation that allowed for the export of LNG, which, if you look back over the last decade, has essentially saved Europe, is saving Europe today, right now, because they can't get gas from Qatar. And these things are happening 200 miles, 300 miles to our, north in Pennsylvania? So we have this tremendous resource, and this data center build-out, while we're going to use all forms of energy and electricity, will be heavily enabled by natural gas. Now, why did President Obama, given the politics at the time, support that and also oversaw the fracking build-out across the country in his presidency? Because it was a bridge fuel to move away from coal, which had higher emissions. And we've talked a lot about all of the above, and I just want to make the point that all of the above is more real than it has ever been in the last 25, 30 years with respect to energy and electricity policy. And that's because of the private capital investments coming from our industry. So, I mean, look, these are big issues. They're global, they're local. And, I think we have a great resource here in this country and in this industry. And I think you're starting to see what I like to say is energy policies kind of moving back between the 40-yard lines, which is frankly the history of our country. That 125-year electricity grid build-out, that was done with a lot of bipartisanship and a lot of what I would just say political common sense, and that's where we are right now. We're going back to that.
So let's then talk a little bit about some of the policymaker stuff. And Vardon, I want to come back to you. The question on the screen gets to water, but I think it's actually a larger question in my mind, which is, particularly in Northern Virginia, there's a high concentration of it, where we're seeing it happen nationally, where a city council member in Indianapolis gets his house shut up because he approved a data center project. You guys have become, you as the industry, I say you guys, have become sort of the poster child of what's wrong in certain respects, whether it's the view that you're polluting or draining water resources, or you're the cause of putting transmission lines, new transmission lines through neighborhoods. How do you combat that perspective from an education standpoint, and how much of that narrative is in fact true?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And that's a really tricky question and gets us into some murky waters. But I just want to first start by saying I think we should all condemn violence as it relates to really anything, but specifically this data center and anti-data center sentiment. We're really disheartened to see the violence in Indiana, in Indianapolis specifically, elsewhere in the country. And so it's a tricky time. I think what we're starting to see is a combination of very legitimate concerns and complaints on environmental degradation, for example, as well as concerns around big tech and the implications of technology on society, two big buckets of why people might be concerned about data centers. And in both of those buckets, I think there's absolutely, great points, but also a lot of misinformation. One of the questions that was just on the screen here, which maybe, we can talk about, is water. So, there's certainly a lot of, questions, legitimate, but also some misinformation on water usage in data centers. To take a big step back and using that as an example, data centers have historically used water in large quantities for evaporative cooling. And without getting into the technical details, because if anybody was an engineer in here, I'd ask them to go grab a cup of coffee like Bill was saying earlier. But in short, necessity is the mother of invention. And so what we as data center developers typically get is a specific amount of water allocated to our projects. Anything in excess of that, we simply can't use. So what that does is provide a natural market force for innovation, and that innovation is really in full swing. And increasingly, these data centers are using less and less water because of technology advancement of the cooling technology that goes inside the building. There are also other strategies like on-site storage to alleviate the water usage that comes into the facility. So I think that there's a lot of sort of education that can be done, and it's complicated. I think it's very easy to latch on to sound bites and with social media posts getting circulated and certain sentiments getting amplified, but the nuances of how these facilities get built, the resources they use, it gets a little complicated and it's difficult to explain.
I've expressed it, and Kevin, I'll come to you and say, I've expressed it as my fear as somebody who represents the industry is that we tend to legislate by Facebook sometimes, which is ironic, right? Because people read or hear things on social media and ascribe it or assign it to every data center project. And the water example is a great one, right? Sure. 10 years ago, evaporative cooling was the thing.
Right.
But in today's world, it's not, yet the myth is perpetuated that every data center is using evaporative cooling and large amounts of water.
Yeah, there's a couple things going on right now with respect to data centers in the political environment. I think they're all cross-pollinating. First of all, these are big demands for electricity. This is a big industrial build-out. Every industrial build-out has growth pains. I talked about that earlier. People have real concerns. I have 3 children. I have a 13-year-old daughter, and the number one issue that we argue about right now is I haven't given her a phone yet. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a technology issue that every single parent has. And that has manifested, that's one example, but that has manifested itself. The physical manifestation of that right now is data centers. And political parties are using affordability as a political issue. Electricity rates have not been a political topic for 30 years. It's been gas prices. Okay, if you look over the last 30 years, it's the oil and gas CEOs that get dragged in front of Congress every time gasoline gets to $4. That's American history. Electricity has never really been something that people were concerned about going up. That is something that people are concerned about. And as Bill said, if you actually look into the data, it's probably the rate of inflation depending on the state or locality. Our industry has to educate better. We have never been built for educating local and state elected officials in 50 states. Okay, we are sitting in the most sophisticated government regulatory regime with respect to data centers in the world. If you go talk to the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors, Fairfax Board of Supervisors, they are the experts when it comes to governing data centers. But I have traveled all across the country in the last 7 months in this job, and I have sat across from Atlanta City Council members. I've sat across from people in Texas, in North Carolina, all over the country. And if you sit across from a local elected official, they'll say, we've built Walmarts, we've built supermarkets, we've built paper mills, we've built chemical plants, we've built refineries. We don't know anything about a data center, and all we see is that you guys are using all, gazillions of gallons of water. And so our industry is trying to play catch up. We are trying to educate as the build out happens. We're resourcing, we're hiring people from other industries like chemical industry, the utility industry, that have experience building effective community affairs. I noticed in your title, and you mentioned it, that you give tours. The amount of tours I have facilitated in data centers in the last 7 months would blow your mind. Hundreds. But I can promise you there's not a dedicated person at the company whose job it is to give tours. We're going to change that. But the point is, we are also trying to do our part to educate in an environment that our companies have never really operated in. I mean, you know this better than I do because you've been doing this for 25 years, but data centers in this area have not historically been controversial. You bought land, you went to the Board of Supervisors, you got your zoning approval. It's only in the last few years as some of these growth pains have percolated to the surface, and they are real. Some mistakes have been made. Those are real issues. But we need to do better as an industry. We need to do better educating. And frankly, dialogues like this are really important. Everybody in this room is a leader in the business community in Northern Virginia. You are a voice in your own industries, in your own communities.
And a consumer.
And a consumer, and a customer. We've never, as an industry, kind of been out here doing this, maybe in this small pocket of Northern Virginia, but not really in Austin, Texas, not in Charlotte and Atlanta, where all these growth markets are happening. So we're trying to mature and raise our level of sophistication as well, and that's gonna take time. And we're doing it in a really hard political environment, no question.
And if I could just add one piece to that, Kevin, I think we're also as an industry getting a lot better at succinctly communicating not only the the myth busting around the issues with data centers, but also communicating the benefits of data centers. And we've talked about on a national scale, as Kevin had said, but just one statistic that hopefully is correct because I looked this up on using AI, but I made it fact check and cite sources. Loudoun County as the beacon of, call it data center demand and growth in the world, one statistic that really stuck out is that less than 5% of the land of Loudoun County is dedicated to data centers, but more than 50% of the tax revenue, both overall and a shade under 50% overall, and roughly 50% of the property tax is generated from the data centers in Loudoun County. There's no doubt that there are legitimate concerns about land use planning and the density of data centers in certain portions of Loudoun County, but that imbalance between the amount of space and land mass these facilities take versus the revenue generated and the downstream impacts of that is just one of the benefits that we're getting better at communicating, not here because it's quite well known, but when we go into, at least when we go into central Pennsylvania or into new markets that have never really even explored a large industrial facility, anything beyond, let's say, like a Walmart, to Kevin's point.
Our company paid over $100 million in property taxes in Loudoun County last year. $100 million. It's a great thing. Go look at the roads. Go look at the schools. But by the way, we're more than happy to do that. We should probably talk about that more. Yeah. It's a great story. I just want to make a point about communicating the message because it's anecdotal, but I was in a community meeting in Atlanta. We're trying to buy a piece of land there to build a data center in the city, not a gigawatt. And I was talking about water to a local community member, and I said, this is a closed loop system. It's going to use 2,600 gallons a day. That seems like a lot. I said, well, that's the same as a McDonald's. I said, so if I was building a McDonald's here, if I was a franchisee, would you be opposing this based on water? Of course they wouldn't. But they've been told that we're going to use all the water in the city of Atlanta. Of course, we're paying for infrastructure to build water infrastructure in that neighborhood. So the ability to say, this data center that's going to be 350,000 square feet is the same as a McDonald's, that's something people can understand. But when you start to get into, difficult statistics and air-cooled, water-cooled, air-chilled, all these different things, we have to talk to real people as an industry, and we're trying to do that in a better way.
So I know we could go on for another hour on this topic, but Jared's over here with the hook.
Giving us the hook.
So we'll leave it at that, and
We
I
just
invite.
want to say we need another panel someday about workforce, because we both
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
That's actually, that worries me. We'll figure the infrastructure piece out.
Workforce.
I'm more worried about it takes as long to train a utility line worker as it does a surgeon.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so we'll all be outside to continue the conversation out in the hallway, but thanks to our panel for participating.
Good morning. My name is Scott Gibson, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Melwood. And as an organization that knows much of our success has depended on valuable partnerships, we're honored to sponsor today's Fireside Chat focused on how cross-sector collaboration and coalition building can strengthen the region's long-term growth and ensure our competitive edge. Started in 1963 by a group of parents who pitched an Army surplus tent and dared to dream of a brighter future for their children with disabilities, Melwood has grown into a family of companies that together serve as a leading employer, service provider, and advocate for people with disabilities. We've been active in the community for over 60 years, and I like to think our journey has followed the path laid out in the NOVA roadmap. We've developed innovative programming that aims to bridge the gap between workers with disabilities and jobs in the IT and tech sectors and the jobs that we are seeing grow here in the region. As part of our work, we see affordable housing as a natural extension of our mission. As people with disabilities enter the workforce and achieve financial independence, often for the first time ever, they face a new critical barrier: access to affordable housing that meets their needs. That's why we've been so proud to partner with Wesley Housing to redevelop our campus in Arlington into a mixed-use building that will offer disability-forward affordable housing. The planned mixed-use building is designed to serve the entire community, not just people with disabilities. It'll offer not only state-of-the-art programming space to support Melwood's programming supporting community living and workforce development for people with disabilities, but also over 100 units of affordable housing for families averaging 60% of the area median income, in many cases earning as little as 30% of the area median income. It'll offer workforce housing and deeply affordable housing. Knowing that accessible units are another challenge in the affordable housing space, 30% of the units will have a priority preference for people with disabilities, and the building's designed to go beyond ADA standards, ensuring full accessibility. What does that mean? This means this will be one of the few apartment buildings in the regions where two wheelchairs can pass each other in a hallway without somebody having to stop and give way. It means adjustable height countertops, and it means more roll-in showers than you would normally see. It includes a mix of 2- and 3-bedroom apartments, so it can be inclusive of families and people living with caregivers. And again, the ground floor will continue to feature that updated programming and community space that Melwood has been known to offer. The first panel spoke to the challenges we face. We know there's broad alignment on the importance of this work, but there are funding gaps. What was once a straightforward path for these projects to be publicly funded is no longer there. The gaps remain, and they are widening, likely going to require private sector investment. And while many people have always been focused on the good of projects like this, we know that there is a growing voice criticizing these projects. That's why we're so glad that groups like Dan's are out there giving voice to the folks who believe in increasing housing stock. I think our project really echoes what we're hearing today, that the need for cross-sector collaboration, including engagement from the business community alongside public-private partnerships, has never been greater. Ensuring Northern Virginia is a choice for future-focused business and talent means ensuring businesses have access to workers and working people have access to affordable living opportunities in the communities they serve. With that, I'm pleased to introduce today's Fireside Chat featuring Todd Stottlemyre, Chief Executive Officer of Essentra Health, a global healthcare technology solutions and services company headquartered in McLean, Virginia. Essentra Health combines public sector knowledge, clinical expertise, and technological ingenuity to modernize the healthcare experience for state and federal partners and their priority populations and for commercial organizations. Essentra Health is backed by Carlyle, a global investment firm. Todd will be joined by Julie Coons, President and CEO of the Northern Virginia Chamber of Commerce. Julie is a transformative business leader who delivers revenue and profit growth through innovation, operational excellence, and culture change. Beginning in September 2018, Julie was selected to serve as the President and CEO of the Northern Virginia Chamber. With nearly 25 years in nonprofit management and significant experience in the private sector before that, Ms. Coons has a keen eye on ensuring the Chamber's members derive a direct value from their membership and from events like we've participated in today. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
All right, thanks, I'm getting there. All right. Good morning, and thank you for being with us, Todd. We really appreciate this, and we're glad all of you are here to really gain the wisdom that you have brought to this region for so many years and continue to. So, as Scott said, we have just heard from two panels full of solutions on housing and on energy infrastructure, and as a CEO running a major employer in this region every day, which of those issues hits your business most directly, and what would actually change for Accenture if it got solved?
First of all, thank you for having me. It's great to be in the spot right before lunch. So we'll try to make this interesting and exciting before we get to lunch. You know, it's a little bit of a false choice. I would say for us, it's housing. We're in the technology business, and I'll talk a little bit more later probably about AI and how we use AI and how important energy is. But housing, because housing fundamentally is around talent. And talent is the ballgame for, I think, most of us as companies. You heard the comment right before with the last panel about how important talent is as it relates to the data infrastructure industry. And talent is the most important ingredient for our success. It is a strategic enabler. Without the talent, we can't be successful. And I think importantly, you know, people that they want to not only be able to work in this region, they want to be able to live in this region. And I think about my own experience and my children. When we moved here, we were here in 1985, and we bought a townhouse. We made combined income of $35,000. And we bought a $75,000 brand new townhouse in Fairfax County. You can't do that today. And we have 5 children, 4 of whom are in the tech space. One is outside the area with our grandson thinking about moving back. Big concern is livability and housing. Can I afford housing? You know, will our 3 other tech workers, will they stay within this region? I don't know. One's an engineer for Google. The other 2 are in business with tech companies. But one of the big issues with them, they want to buy a house. And it's very expensive. So I think housing, if we're going to attract talent and keep talent, we've got to find a way to make housing more available, more affordable.
Yeah. When you're competing for talent, and it follows on against companies in Austin, Denver, Atlanta, cities actively investing in livability and affordability, how does Northern Virginia's housing reality show up in that competition? Are we at a lesser advantage? And what would change about your recruiting story if we fixed it?
Yeah, so we have people in all 50 states and globally, so we get to see the housing markets across the country. And there are markets where it's a lot less expensive. And frankly, the standard of living wages are not dramatically different than here. So you have a much higher purchasing power. There are also areas of the country that are very expensive. You get to the valley, places like that are very expensive. But I think reputationally, we have a reputation. This is an expensive place to live, that housing is not inexpensive, that there's a shortage of housing, particularly affordable housing, within this region, and that hurts us. I mean, to the extent that we can address it, it gives us a much broader labor pool. And we want a broad labor pool as we go forward. Again, going back to the talent issue, I mean, talent is so important. And you think about some of the math statistics out there that we're up against as a region, as in a country. I mean, you probably saw this week the replacement rate was 1.57, the lowest birth replacement rate, the lowest it's ever been in the history of the country. 2.1 is the replacement rate you need to continue to have more producers than consumers. So we have a math problem in the United States. And then again, when you think about immigration, that's been so important to this region. I'm talking about legal immigration that's been so important to this region. That complicates that problem as well. I'll just add, I spoke a few weeks ago when we were talking about immigration, interesting set of numbers, 17, 20, 27, and 45. 17% of the nurses who practice medicine in the United States were not born in the United States. 20% of the engineers. 27% of our physicians who actually practice medicine in the United States were not born here. 45% of the Fortune 500 companies were founded by immigrants or the children of immigrants. So immigration has been an important part of the talent equation in Northern Virginia and the country. So you look at birth replacement rate declining, immigration declining. It's not a philosophy issue, it's a math problem that we have.
Yeah. The energy panel, and you referenced it, talked about Northern Virginia becoming a launch pad for the national AI build-out. As a CEO running data and technology intensive business, what does reliable, affordable, abundant energy actually unlock for your operations and your growth strategy?
Yeah, I think, I was listening to the panel before. I think at one point we probably viewed energy as a utility. I mean, it was a simple utility that we just assumed that we had, and our lights went on and it powered our businesses. I mean, now it is a strategic enabler. I mean, it's critical to our success as businesses. It's critical to the success of technology businesses. And data centers are very important, don't get me wrong, and the infrastructure that we build is very important. I think the most interesting thing and the greatest opportunity for Northern Virginia is what do we do on top of that infrastructure? When we start thinking about applied AI, when we start thinking about health tech, climate tech, if you think about the computational intensity that's required in the healthcare space today, how do we use data to make better real-time decisions around health? How do we use data to make better real-time decisions to have predictive medicine? Again, real opportunities, and that is predicated on the infrastructure and what we do with the infrastructure within this region.
Yeah. Accenture, as you just pointed out, sits at the intersection of healthcare and technology. The sectors, the roadmap says, should anchor our new economy. If Northern Virginia successfully builds that diversified innovation ecosystem, what new business opportunities does that create for a company like yours that don't exist today?
Yeah, I think the most exciting thing today with tech is the intersection with I'm a big believer in intersections. Steve Jobs was a big believer in intersections and how technology intersects with healthcare, how it intersects with finance, how it intersects with energy. And so I think it creates adjacencies and new opportunities because of those intersections. And, we use AI day in and day out, not only to run our business, but also the products and solutions that we deploy for our clients are very AI intensive. And more AI intensive as we go forward. So I think it's those adjacencies, those intersections are going to be the most significant opportunities in Northern Virginia, also as a country.
Yeah. Beyond your own company, if the region gets this right, what kind of businesses start choosing Northern Virginia that aren't choosing it today? And what's the profile of the employer we're not yet attracting, but we could be?
Yeah, that's a great question. In some ways, I think you're going to ask me a question a little bit later about some of the other big centers around the country. In some ways, I mean, we grew as a region because we had this big venture capital firm across the river called the United States government. And we need to be honest about that. And that created a tremendous amount of growth, mostly in the services side. So when I think of Northern Virginia, and again, I'm talking more on the tech side, a lot of services businesses, we have headquarters businesses here. I think that what will be different is that we would be more product oriented, that we actually create industries, not just service those industries, that we create products, that we have tech-led innovation, that we're actually building new industries, building new products, not just servicing those sectors and servicing those industries. And I think that would be very different. That's going to involve a higher level of intellectual property. I think it's going to somewhat change the workforce that we have today. I think the innovation quotient would go up substantially, and I think we would have accelerated growth within the region. So more than just services and headquarters, really product-driven creation of new industries, creation of new products and technologies, not just servicing those.
Yeah, I know we have some of that with the emerging commercial space industry here, but yeah, couldn't agree more that we need to see more of it. You've built coalitions. You've had such an interesting career across public, private, and nonprofit sectors throughout your career. When that kind of cross-sector collaboration actually produces something real, not just a report or a task force, what did the leaders in those rooms do differently? What's the ingredient most people miss?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the ingredient they miss is we focus a lot on process, but we need to focus on outcomes. And when you think about it, first of all, establishing some vision for where we want to go, and then outcomes. And we need to measure outcomes. We need to align resources. We need to align people, so aligning treasure and talent around those that vision and those outcomes, and I think that's important. You know, we go to how many people? You go to a lot of meetings with different organizations, and people talk a lot about problems. It's fun to talk about problems. It's more interesting to actually solve them. And I think changing that mentality to more of action than process and outcomes and activities, I think that would be something that would be very important. Because when you do that, you're going to make, by definition, you're going to make trade-offs. You're going to do trade-off type analysis, and you're going to look to make real change, not just talking about change, but actually affecting change. And I think that's, you know, we talk a lot in this region. I think we need to act more than talk.
Well, you were very much a leader in helping us get to that vision around roadmap, and I think that your point about moving from vision to action, and that's really, you know, we're in the very beginning phases of that, but hyper-focused on outcomes. We've got to get there.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I liked about the work that's been done. It very much is focused on outcomes. There's an old quote that says, you have to have a great vision, you have to have great strategy, but vision and strategy without execution is a form of hallucination. I think that's true. You can have a great vision. You got a vision. You have to have a strategy, execute, but you got to execute against the vision, and you got to execute against the strategy. And I think that's one of the opportunities with the roadmap. The vision has been put out there, and also executable steps, and we've got to hold ourselves accountable. I think also, you know, successful coalitions, you have deadlines, you have milestones, you try things, you have proofs of concept. You're willing to put resources in government, private sector, try things. If they work, you scale. If they don't, you end them. You try something different. I think those are opportunities for the region as well.
Yeah. You referenced some different regions in the country. Roadmap points to Austin, Pittsburgh, Raleigh-Durham as transformation models. Which one of these do you find most instructive for Northern Virginia, and what's the specific move they made that we haven't made yet but absolutely could?
Yeah, there's some things. I mean, I think of Pittsburgh. I was born in Pittsburgh, actually. Pittsburgh was it was a regeneration. Because Pittsburgh went through the steel mills and the economy collapsed. And Pittsburgh really built off the strength of Carnegie Mellon, the other universities in Pittsburgh, UPMC, the healthcare system, and really focused on tech and health and created a whole new economy. When my parents left in Pittsburgh to move down here, they had a white Falcon, and the car was actually a tint of orange, and that was from the steel mills. I mean, it was you couldn't swim in the river, so Pittsburgh went through an amazing process to create a whole new economy, and they've been very successful. Interesting, when we were forming the Northern Virginia Technology Council, that was part of the chamber. The tech council that we went to look at in 1989 was Pittsburgh Technology Council. We actually emulated the creation of the tech council off of Pittsburgh. Austin's anchored by the University of Texas, high tech. The one to me is probably Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill, because I think, I mentioned a minute ago, we had this big venture capital firm here in Northern Virginia called the federal government. So we had enormous advantages, enormous assets, all this money getting pumped out, starting really in the 1960s with the race with the Soviets to the moon, our defense budgets first, and then commercial, or civilian budgets. We had great advantages. Raleigh-Durham, Chapel Hill had universities and not really anything else. Now, having Duke, North Carolina State, University of North Carolina A&T, and other universities there is a big deal in terms of talent, but they had a great vision for the Research Triangle Park, and they articulated a vision. They aligned government, industry, and the academic institutions to build this remarkable Research Triangle Park and create this enormous amount of economic activity. So I think there was great vision there for the future, and there was alignment, there was leadership, there were resources. Here, and I love our region, don't get me wrong, but to some extent we had this enormous advantage, and things just happen to us, and that's great, but you can get a little complacent and lazy when things happen, as opposed to be very, very intentional about articulating a vision and a strategy, aligning government, industry, and academia, putting the resources behind it, and then be very focused and going after it. So I would say Raleigh-Durham.
A word that's coming up a lot in conversations about some of these regions when people talk to us is the word scrappy. That there is a sense, and I don't know if that's the perfect word, but that there is this sense that we have to do. We have to figure out how to do, and maybe out of our comfort zone, or maybe not the way we did it in the past. Do you see that in some of these other areas relative to what our traditional norms have been?
I mean, certainly, the Valley early on was very, very scrappy, a very different culture. Pittsburgh was really scrappy because that economy was in the tank. I mean, that city was polluted. If you've been to Pittsburgh Point State Park, which is at the head of the three rivers, you wouldn't go in those rivers to save your life because you probably come out with some disease and your lifespan would be shortened. That's a clean river now. They did a remarkable job cleaning up the rivers in Pittsburgh, the environment. They built, clean industries tech, building off the strength of Carnegie Mellon, University of Pittsburgh, other universities. They focused, they partnered with UPMC to great healthcare capabilities. So Pittsburgh, I think, was really scrappy. I don't think we're scrappy enough. And again, you can when the tide is rising so fast, that doesn't force you to be scrappy, because the tide's rising. Yeah. And I think we're in a different environment today. We're always going to have the federal government across the river. We're always going to spend money. I don't think we're going to be able to spend as much because, again, we have a math problem. But we've got to be more scrappy. We've got to quit saying, well, this is the way we've always done it. In some ways, we may be playing a different sport with a different playbook and a different set of plays today. We can't keep playing the same sport, same playbook, same set of plays and expecting to get better results. So I agree, we have to be scrappy. We've got to push our own audaciousness in being bold if we're going to be successful in this region.
If you could design one new institution, program, or initiative for this region that doesn't exist today, something that would accelerate everything we've talked about faster than anything else, what would it be and who should build it?
A couple thoughts. Maybe at a governmental level, this competition between jurisdictions has just got to end. It's got to stop. We are in Northern Virginia. It's one of the reasons we created something called Growth and Opportunity Virginia. Go Virginia was to get this competition between jurisdictions to stop, because it's a waste of time. It's not improving the region. It's not strengthening the region. It's not strengthening our ability to compete. So anything that forces greater collaboration and eliminating the, I would say, false barriers that exist between jurisdictions, I think will be helpful. I think something, thinking about something around a discovery and innovation hub that for our most difficult challenges, whether it's housing, energy, workforce, that the private sector, the public sector could work closely together with the energy and speed of the private sector to take on some difficult challenges and take them from concept to implementation, proofs of concept. Let's try something. Let's invest. If it works, it succeeds, we can scale. If it doesn't, we can stop it, learn, and go do something else. So I think something like that, I think, would be beneficial to the region, because like all regions, we have our own set of challenges and opportunities, and we want to mitigate the challenges, and we want to take advantage and really leverage the opportunities. So something around discovery innovation that takes from concept to execution, and we do it with speed. We've got to pick up, we've got to increase the clock speed in this region around decisions we make, around initiatives, and again, focus on outcomes, not just activities.
Okay. I think we're getting a couple questions here. So how do the healthcare cuts in H.R. 1 impact your business, and how do you foresee their impact on the region and the Commonwealth?
So our business, healthcare, we work across commercial entities and we work across government, both states, and a little bit of federal, not very much federal. But obviously the changes in Medicaid, they're pretty significant changes in funding. We're on the systems and on the clinical system side, not on the actual delivery of care. So anytime you put pressure on budgets, that's going to put pressure. And I think it really forces us as a company and as an industry, and frankly as a region, to be more innovative. And we're going to have to do that to be successful. I asked somebody a question yesterday. I was with them. I said, when does the music stop? And he said, what do you mean? I said, we have $39 trillion in debt. And again, forget politics and philosophy. We have a math problem in the United States of America. And I think we're in deniability about that, because eventually that math problem becomes a problem. Not just for anybody who's doing work with the federal government, but you're doing work with states. They're just pressures. So I think we've got to use, in my business, we've got to use technology to significantly drive down the cost of what we do in order to drive down the prices of what we sell to our clients. And if you were my company, you would hear every day we talk about better, faster, lower cost to serve. How do we use technology to develop, deliver, and deploy our products better, faster, lower cost to serve? Because we are aware healthcare overall, healthcare inflation is much higher than the overall inflation rate. As we all know, we experience it's getting, every year, healthcare increases significantly. Same thing on the government side, government programs, Medicare, Medicaid, and we are resource constrained already. And again, you probably all know this, the federal expenditures, 2/3 of our expenditures are Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, right? Domestic spending, discretionary, defense are about 14% each, and the rest is interest on the debt. And that interest on the debt percentage is starting to gallop, right? So we are going to have price pressure. So as an industry, a business, a region, we've got to find ways to use technology to drive down the prices in order to be competitive and also to respond to an environment where we're going to have fewer resources.
During this morning's housing panel, there was a discussion around how impactful it is when the private sector can step forward, and Amazon was used as an example, to invest in housing, and broadly speaking, affordable certainly, but housing as a whole. Do you see a role for the private sector in some sort of housing fund or individual projects? What is your view on that?
Yeah, in terms of actually building housing, I think different businesses will respond in different ways. I know when I was at Innova, housing was a big issue for nursing and things like that. How do we, we talked about how do we get into the housing business? Do we get into the housing business in that regard? I think all of us, we provide stipends and things like that to support employees if they're moving and things like that. I think that's an open question about what role would businesses specifically play in developing housing. I think we've got to find ways to drive down the cost of housing. I don't know, the earlier panel today, they talked about actually building a home, the permitting process. Time is money. It's expensive. It's elongated. We've got to increase the speed. We've got to, of course, protect safety and the environment and all the things as well in the construction of housing. But we've got to find a way to build and deliver housing at a different price than we're doing so today, because otherwise we risk not being able to keep our talent and not being able to attract talent to this region.
Yeah. So this audience is going to walk out here in a few minutes. What's the one thing you want them to do? Not discuss, not put on a committee agenda, but actually do in the next 30 days to move this region forward?
I would say this. I would say think about something that's important. One of the challenges we face, and whether it's housing, energy, workforce, whatever it is, and think about how you might either resource that more or remove a barrier. And think about that. And think with an action orientation. Again, I think these forums are great. I love these forums. They're nice conversations. I think we've got to be more action oriented. We've also got to be more willing, I think, in this region to be willing to fail. And fail quickly, but we've got to push the innovation quotient. We've got to push things, and we've got to be able to say, what, we pushed it, we resourced it, it didn't work, we learned something, we're going to try something different. And I think there's been, in this region, one of the things you said about scrappy, I think also to some extent we've been a little bit risk averse as a region, where we kind of want more certainty. And that may go to the fact that we've had this big venture capital firm across the river, that it's kind of been easy, lots of resources, more scrappy, more innovative, more willing to push, fail, and more action-oriented.
Yeah. I'm going to close here with a question that's sort of emerged recently, and it's been in the press some as well, which is there's a sense that our government-business partnership is not as strong as it used to be. And we certainly are hearing that at NVC. And, we want very much that partnership with our government. And is there anything we can do better in either perhaps telling our story, engaging, because we don't feel as though there's a great appreciation for that enormous growth that we do provide in this region?
Yeah, I'd probably say for all of us, we probably need to listen more to one another, because I assume people have good intent, even if they disagree with you, and I think we probably ought to listen more. I think if we have better understanding and empathy where government's coming from and they understand where we're coming from, we'll probably get to a better place. I think we need to be solutions oriented. I think we need to understand that we can't get everything we may want, that there are always trade-offs. We need to think about those trade-offs. I'm a big fan of Madisonian moderation. If you know Madison, a Virginian, thank goodness he wrote the Constitution. He got most things right, not everything, but most things right. And that was around a set of compromises and trade-offs, mostly good, some not so good, but mostly good. And I think we have to do that. We have to be in constant dialogue. I think we do have to tell our story, that government spends the resources that are created by private industry and a tax base. So I think it's important for government to remember. And I think it's important for us to remember that government, they have clear responsibilities around the environment, public safety, and infrastructure and things like that. And we need to assume good intentions, and we need to spend a lot of time with one another. I mean, really, I think you got a dialogue with an action orientation, not just conversational, let's talk about things, but with an action orientation, because speed is both our friend and our enemy at this point, because things are moving very quickly. One last story. Mike Daniels, some of you may have known Mike. He was one of the great leaders of this region and built great companies, and a very humble person. And he passed last year, and we talked often. And one of the things he said to me, he wrote a book about technology waves, and he remembers the chip wave in the 1960s, obviously the personal computing wave in the early 1980s, the internet and cloud 1990s, and now today. And he said technology is moving faster than it's ever moved before, and it's going to exponentially increase and accelerate the pace of change. So we've got to understand that the pace of change is faster. It's highly disruptive. I think we're in the most disruptive period. I'm not into hyperbole in my lifetime. I think that disruption has implications in terms of the destruction of jobs, the creation of new jobs. So I think that dialogue with our governmental partners is going to be important so that we can create the framework for sustained growth.
Yeah. Todd, thank you so much. We're so grateful for your contributions today and your leadership in this region. So thank you so much. Okay.
All right, thank you everyone for being here. Just one more round of applause for Todd and Julie. Thank you so much. Also want to thank our other sponsors and our moderators. Thank you very much for everything you've done for us today. And I want to thank our sponsors once again, Washington Gas, Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Dominion Energy, and William A. Hazel. Thank you very much for your support. Thank you. Just concluding, I want to make sure you're aware, on Thursday, May 14th, we do have our Distinguished Service Awards breakfast at the Army-Navy Country Club, and I hope you'll join us for that. We've got our Executive Member Forum on to the 24th. If you're an MDC member, please join us for a discussion on the Governor's bill signings, vetoes, and amendments that will be impacting the business community. And of course, if you're not yet a member, please see one of the staff members. We'd love to see if you a role for you to advocate for Roadmap. If you've been invited to our post-event luncheon, please see one of the staff members on your way out the door. And again, thank you very much